Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into a place that remains one of the world's biggest mysteries, North Korea. Officially the DPRK, right? The Democratic People's Republic.
That's the one. And it's this nation defined, at least from the outside, by extreme isolation, almost constant military tension, and these really intense public displays of loyalty that often leave outsiders scratching their heads.
Exactly. Like those images, remember, after Kim Jong-il died, thousands of people in the streets weeping, seemingly inconsolable. It forces you to ask, is that real?
That's the absolute core question, isn't it? Is it genuine belief, this sort of mass devotion to a leader they see almost as a god, the Soo-young? Or is it fundamentally just a show, a performance mandated by a regime where showing anything less, well, the consequences are terrifying.
Right. So that's our mission today. We want to synthesize the whole story, or as much as we can, from its roots in Japanese occupation through the Korean War, the building of the Kim dynasty's ideology, all the way up to Kim Jong-un and the nuclear challenges we see now.
We're going to try and unpack the key ideological anchors, the major conflicts, basically everything that shaped the DPRK into what it is today.
Okay, so where do we even start? To get North Korea, you have to go back before North Korea even existed, right? Back to the Japanese occupation.
Absolutely. It all starts there, really.
Yeah.
From about 1905, Korea was essentially run as a Japanese military colony. We're talking armed teachers in schools, a huge police presence.
Wow, armed teachers.
Yeah, and the main goal was resource extraction.
Yeah.
They systematically suppressed Korean language, Korean history. It was brutal.
And people fought back initially. I read about guerrilla fighters.
They did. Thousands initially, but the Japanese military was just overwhelming. By 1910, that armed resistance was mostly crushed, but the resentment, that deep desire for independence, just simmered.
Until World War I ended. I remember Woodrow Wilson and his talk of self-determination kind of lit a fire.
It absolutely did. It led to huge protests across Korea in 19... But the Japanese crackdown was horrific. It really set a precedent for state violence.
You mentioned an example in the outline, locking protesters in a church.
Yeah, there are documented cases, locking hundreds inside a church and burning it down. That level of brutality and the fact that peaceful protests achieved nothing, it really hardened people and pushed them towards more radical solutions.
And that's where the communists come in.
Exactly. Inspired by the Russian Revolution next door, Korean communists quickly became the most effective, the most organized force fighting the Japanese. They were seen as the tip of the anti-Japanese spear.
Because they weren't just promising independence, they were promising land overthrowing the old system.
Right, appealing directly to the huge peasant population, promising an end to imperialism. This fight forced many, including the man who'd become the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, to flee into China or the Soviet Union.
Okay, Kim Il-sung, born near Pyongyang, 1912. His family had Christian ties, but they were also anti-Japanese.
Yes, they fled to Manchuria in China, partly because of that activity. Kim joined the Chinese Communist Party in 1931 and quickly made a name for himself as a very effective guerrilla leader against the Japanese. He got the nickname the Tiger.
The Tiger. And the key event, the one that's central to the whole Kim dynasty myth, is the Battle of Pashambo in 1937.
That's the one. He led about 200 guerrillas, raided a Japanese-held town, Pashambo, defeated the soldiers there, burned some buildings. It was a relatively small raid in the grand...
But Kim spun it.
Oh, massive. Propaganda turned it into this pivotal moment. Kim himself described it as heralding the dawn of the liberation of Korea. It became the foundation stone of his claim to be the leader of the Korean resistance.
After that, the Japanese really went after him.
They did. He was forced to retreat into the Soviet Union around 1940, where he actually joined the Soviet Red Army, got formal military training. He was there until 1945.
Right when the Soviets declared war on Japan. So he came back into Korea with the Soviet army.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the Americans landed in the South. And then we get this almost absurd moment where the Allies need to manage the Japanese surrender.
The 38th parallel, chosen, as the notes say, in like half an hour by a couple of Americans.
Yeah, basically two mid-level U.S. officers looking at a map late at night. They needed a dividing line. The 38th parallel roughly split the peninsula in half and, crucially, kept the capital, Seoul, in the American zone.
And that line, picked almost randomly, becomes one of the most heavily fortified, dangerous borders on the planet. Incredible.
It really is. And right around this time, as Kim Il-sung arrives in Pyongyang with Soviet back, we get this bizarre conspiracy bubble, the Kim deception.
Ah, yes. The idea that the Kim Il-sung who showed up wasn't the real Kim, the famous guerrilla.
Exactly. The theory, which the CIA actually investigated pretty seriously for a while, was that the original Tiger had died or been killed sometime earlier.
So who was the guy the Soviets installed?
The theory proposed He was maybe a different, lesser-known Korean officer, or even a criminal some the Soviets could easily control, who was essentially blackmailed into taking the famous name.
Why did anyone leave them?
Well, two main things. First, apparently when this Kim arrived in Pyongyang in 1945, some older nationalists who remember the original guerrilla campaign didn't recognize him. They thought he looked too young, too different.
Okay.
Second, it fit a narrative of Soviet manipulation. If they couldn't find the real hero, they'd just create one to ensure their guy was in charge.
So is it true?
Almost certainly not. Most historians dismiss it now. People who fought alongside Kim in Manchuria later confirmed his identity. But it's fascinating because it highlights this early skepticism, this seed of doubt about whether the entire foundational myth of the DPRK might be built on, well, a fabrication.
Real or not, the Kim Il-sung, backed by Stalin, moved incredibly fast in the north.
Incredibly fast. With full Soviet support, he didn't have to negotiate. 1946 alone saw massive land reform, seizing land from landlords without compensation, giving it to peasants, nationalizing all major industry, banks, transport, basically dismantling the old colonial structure overnight.
And he introduced a sexual equality law, too. That seems quite progressive for the time.
It was, on paper at least. And initially, the North actually saw a pretty significant economic recovery in those first few years, 46, 47, better than the South initially.
But Stalin's backing didn't mean he had total control, right? You mentioned internal rivals.
Oh, absolutely. His position was actually quite precarious internally. He faced powerful competing communist factions. You had the Soviet Koreans, ethnic Koreans, but with Soviet citizenship, loyal to Moscow.
Okay.
Then the Yan'an faction, these were communists who'd fought with Mao in China. Very powerful, especially after Mao won the Chinese Civil War in 49.
And the third group,
The South Korean side. Communists from the South focused on reunifying the peninsula. Their leader, Pak Han-young, was probably Kim's smartest and most dangerous rival.
So Kim's surrounded by potential threats. Soviet loyalists, China loyalists, reunification hardliners.
It's a powder keg. He's got 3 different groups, all vying for influence, all with different patrons or agendas.
So what's the quickest way to unify everyone behind you and sideline your rival?
War. By 1950, Kim had built up the Korean People's Army, the KPA, with massive Soviet help tanks, planes, training. He felt ready.
And the international situation looked good for him.
It looked perfect. Mao had just won in China, providing a powerful ally on his border. The Soviets had successfully tested their first atomic bomb in 49, breaking the U.S. monopoly. And crucially, the U.S. had withdrawn most of its troops from South Korea.
Leaving the South.
Massively vulnerable. Kim had something like a 2-to-1 advantage in troops, maybe 10-to-1 in air power, and crucially, about 300 Soviet T-34 tanks. The South had basically 0 tanks.
So the invasion on June 25th, 1950, it just rolled over the South.
Completely. Seoul fell in just 5 days. It looked like total victory for the North was just weeks away.
But then the U.S. and the UN intervened. MacArthur's landing at...
That changed everything. A brilliant, incredibly risky amphibious landing behind North Korean line. It completely shattered the KPA's supply lines and momentum.
So the tide turned dramatically.
Dramatically. What was almost a complete northern victory turned into a catastrophic rout. UN forces pushed the KPA all the way back, deep into North Korea, almost to the Chinese border on the Yalu River.
And this near collapse, this is where the bombing comes in, the thing that really shapes North Korea's views.
Exactly. Once the UN, primarily the U.S. Air Force, gained air superiority, they unleashed a strategic bombing campaign that was, well, apocalyptic is maybe the only word.
Pyongyang flat.
Literally flat. Contemporary reports and later analysis confirmed basically not a single significant building was left standing in the capital. And it wasn't just Pyongyang.
I remember the statistic from the outline, more bombs dropped on North Korea than in the entire Pacific theater of World War II.
That's correct. It's an almost unbelievable scale of destruction. One U.S. general involved later said that by late 1950, they essentially stopped targeting specific things because there was, quote, nothing left to bomb.
Estimates are like 80% of all buildings destroyed.
At least 80%, possibly more. Towns, villages, infrastructure. This wasn't just collateral damage. It was the systematic leveling of a country from the air.
And this experience, this trauma, it's not just history, is it? It's foundational.
It's absolutely foundational. More than communist ideology, more than Juche, this experience of near total annihilation at the hands of the United States is what fuels the deep, visceral, pervasive hatred of the U.S. within North Korean society and state propaganda even today. It justifies everything else.
Every sacrifice, every military budget.
Exactly. It's the ultimate justification for why they need nuclear weapons, why they need to be self-reliant, why they can never trust the outside world, especially America.
The only thing that saved the North Korean regime at that point was China stepping.
Right. China issued warnings, which the UN, especially MacArthur, largely ignored. Then Mao sent hundreds of thousands of troops, officially people's volunteers, pouring across the Yalu River.
And they pushed the UN forces back.
They did. They retook Pyongyang, pushed the front line back down near the original 38th parallel, and that's where the war basically ground down into a brutal, bloody stalemate for another 2 long years.
Until the armistice in 1953, which, crucially, wasn't a peace treaty.
Still isn't. Technically, the Korean War has never officially ended. They just stopped fighting.
Okay, so 1950, the fighting stopped. North Korea is utterly dead. Kim Il-sung failed to unify. He must have been under immense pressure internally.
Immense pressure. The country was in ruins. GDP had cratered by something like 75%. And he knew those rival factions, the Soviet Koreans, the Yangon group, were watching, ready to blame him.
So how does he survive that? How does he turn total failure into consolidating absolute power?
He was a master political operator. First, he deflected all blame outwards toward the American imperialists for the destruction. Then, internally, he brilliantly scapegoated his rivals.
He blamed them for the war not succeeding.
Precisely. He argued that the failure to reunify, the slow rebuilding, the economic hardship, it was all because of these traitors and factionalists within the party who had sabotaged the war effort. It was incredibly cynical, but effective.
And the purges started quickly.
Very quickly. Ho Ka-i, the leader of the Soviet Korean faction, was targeted early. The regime claims he committed suicide, but he was certainly purged. But the biggest target was Park Han-young.
The leader of the South Korean faction, his main rival.
Yes. Park was intelligent, respected. Kim saw him as a huge threat. He had Park arrested, accused him of being an American spy, the ultimate charge, and put him through a huge public show trial.
And executed him.
Executed in 1955. It sent a chilling message through the entire political system. Your primary loyalty is not to Moscow, not to Beijing, not even to the idea of communism itself. It's to Kim Il-sung.
With the rivals gone, he needed an ideology to cement his rule, something uniquely Korean. Enter Juche.
Exactly. Introduced formally around 1955, Juche, or self-reliance, became the absolute bedrock of North Korean ideology. It's the idea that Korea must rely only on itself, militarily, economically, politically, ideologically.
So total isolationism.
Pretty much. Rejecting international trade networks, focusing on domestic production for everything. And socially, it meant sealing the country off from corrupting foreign ideas, positioning Korea, and therefore Kim, as the center of its own universe.
This intense nationalism, focusing inward, naturally leads to the cult of personality around Kim himself.
It's inseparable. He declared himself Suryong, the great leader. Not just a political figure, but the literal embodiment of the nation's spirit and destiny. Any criticism of him became treason against Korea itself.
And the cult got weirdly specific, like the rules about newspapers.
Oh, yeah. It became illegal to even wrap fish in a newspaper that had Kim's picture or name on it. It would crumble his image. Printing his photo on low-quality paper was a serious offense. It permeated every absolute veneration of man.
This absolute power nearly blew up in his face, though, in 1956, the August Fact.
Right. This was triggered by Khrushchev's secret speech in the USSR denouncing Stalin's cult of personality. Kim was actually summoned to Moscow and apparently got quite an earful.
And his rivals back home saw an opportunity.
They did. While Kim was away, or maybe just after he got back, elements from the Soviet and Yangon faction tried to use a party meeting to criticize Kim's growing dictatorship, his personality cult, and the economic policies that favored heavy industry over people's basics.
But they failed. Why?
They fundamentally miscalculated. They attacked Kim based on principles coming from Moscow or Beijing, criticizing his cult like Khrushchev did, pointing out economic flaws. But Kim had spent years building his image as the ultimate Korean national, the father of Juche.
So attacking him looked like attacking Korea itself.
Exactly. And his loyalists shouted down the critics, accusing them of being puppets of foreign power. The critics were expelled, arrested, purged. Kim even ignored direct pleas from both Moscow and Beijing to stop the purges. He proved he was now truly independent of his patrons by crushing their allies within his own party.
Total control achieved. So then he focuses on the economy, the 5-year plans, the Chulima campaign.
Yes. The late 50s saw a huge push for rapid industrialization. The 3-year plan, then the 5-year massive investment, 80% poured into heavy industry, steel, machinery, chemical. And he tried to motivate workers with the Chulima Undang, the flying horse.
Like a Stakhanovite movement, a competition quotas.
Exactly. Workers encouraged to form brigades, compete fiercely to overfulfill massive quotas. They got medals, public praise. But this obsession with hitting targets, with numbers, had a dark side.
Officials started lying about production.
Terribly, especially in agriculture. Local officials, terrified of punishment for not meeting grain quotas, just inflated their reports. Lie piled on lie all the way up to Pyongyang.
So the central government thought they had way more food than they actually did.
Precise. Based on these fake numbers, the state seized too much grain from the farmers for the cities and the military. And the result, combined with some bad harvests, was a devastating famine around 1955.
Wow. Another famine before the big one in the 90s.
Yes. This one is less well known, but was horrific. Soviet archives later suggested maybe 800,000 people died between 54 and 55.
Hmm.
East German sources estimated maybe a quarter of all North Korean children starved.
And this was hidden.
Completely hidden by the regime's propaganda about the success of the 5-year plan. It showed that output figures mattered more than lives. It also led to absurd campaigns like drink no soup.
Sorry, drink no soup.
Yeah, workers were literally encouraged not to drink soup or too much water during the day so they wouldn't need bathroom breaks, maximizing time on the factory floor. Productivity at any cost.
That's grim. Alongside this economic control, Kim also implemented a system of social, right? The Songbun.
Yes, introduced around 1957. Songbun is basically a hereditary caste system based on perceived political loyalty, determined by your family's background and actions during the Japanese occupation and the Korean War. It's possibly the single most important factor shaping a North Korean's life.
So it divides everyone up. How does it work?
Broadly, 3 main classes, though there are dozens of subcategories. First, the core class, about 28% of the population. These are descendants of anti-Japanese fighters, war heroes, loyal peasants. They get the best jobs, housing in Pyongyang, access to universities, better rations.
Okay, the loyal elite.
The wavering class, the biggest group, maybe 45%. Families of merchants, intellectuals, people who stayed neutral, maybe had relatives who fled south. They're watched, have fewer opportunities, generally can't live in the capital.
And the third class.
The hostile class, around 27%, descendants of landlords, businessmen, religious figures, collaborators with the Japanese, families of political prisoners. They face severe discrimination, are often relegated to poor rural areas or mining towns, get the worst jobs, poorest ration, and have virtually zero chance of advance.
And this is hereditary. Your parent's Songbun determines...
Absolutely. It affects who you can marry. Marrying into a lower Songbun is disastrous for your future. It affects healthcare access, food distribution via the PDS ration system, everything. It locks in loyalty across generations by perpetually punishing the descendants of the untrustworthy.
It sounds incredibly rigid, almost feudal.
It is. And while all this is happening, the state propaganda is churning out this image of North Korea as a paradise. No crime, no social problems.
Right. They claim things like blindness, deafness, alcoholism, even homosexuality just didn't exist in their perfect...
Because anything that deviated from the image of the strong, healthy, loyal worker was simply removed, hidden away. That chilling quote from the visitor after the war, asking where all the disabled people were, what have they done with them all?
It implies they were segregated, institutionalized, or worse.
Exactly. And the mechanism for dealing with dissent or perceived disloyalty was the prison camp system modeled on the Soviet Gulag. 2 main types.
Kyowaso and Kwanliso.
Right. Kyowaso are essentially re-education camps for regular criminals, but also low-level political offenses. Think forced labor, intense ideological study, brutal, but with a theoretical possibility of release.
And Kwanliso.
Those are the political concentration camps. For people deemed enemies of the state, irredeemable. Often entire families were imprisoned together under the principle of collective responsibility. People purged after the August faction incident, for example. Conditions are horrific. Starvation, torture, executions are routine.
The guards estimate you mentioned a third of...
From beatings, losing fingers, ears, eyes. The official guidance was explicit. These prisoners are not to be treated as humans. They are outside the protection of the state entirely.
Okay, so internal control is absolute. What about external? Kim starts pushing militarily again in the 60s. Byungjin.
Yes, Byungjin. The idea that economic development and military power go hand in hand. Arms in one hand, hammer and sickle in the other. This led to a much more aggressive stance in the late 60s.
The so-called Second Korean War.
Right. From about 66 to 69, Kim, maybe inspired by Vietnam, launched a sustained campaign of guerrilla infiltration across the DMZ. Skirmishes, ambushes, sabotage attempts increased dramatically.
And the peak of that was the attempt to kill the South Korean president, the Blue House raid.
Yeah, 31 elite North Korean commandos got incredibly close to the presidential palace in Seoul. It was a major security failure for the South. But the mission itself failed spectacularly because of the commandos' own propaganda-fueled assumptions.
The woodcutters story.
Exactly. On their way south, they encountered 4 civilian woodcutters. Instead of killing them, they lectured them on the virtues of communism, assuming these oppressed Southerners would welcome liberation and let them go.
And the woodcutters immediately ran to the police.
Instantly. Commando's element of surprise was gone. Almost all were killed or captured in the ensuing firefight in Seoul. Only one reportedly made it back north. It showed this profound disconnect between Pyongyang's view of the South and reality.
And just days after that failed raid, North Korea seized a U.S. Navy ship.
The USS Pueblo. Reconnaissance ship captured in international waters, according to the U.S. Territorial waters, according to the North. 1 sailor was killed. The rest of the crew held prisoner for 11 agonizing months. It brought the U.S. and North Korea very close to another war.
Tensions stayed high. Then the incident with the tree, Operation Paul Bunyan in 7.
Bizarre, but deadly Syria. It started simply because a poplar tree in the joint security area of the DMZ was blocking the view between UN observation posts when a U.S. and South Korean team went to trim it.
North Korean soldiers attacked them with axes.
Brutally murdered 2 American officers, Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett. It was a shocking escalation over something seemingly trivial.
But the U.S. response wasn't war, it was cutting down the tree.
With overwhelming force. Operation Paul Bunyan involved hundreds of heavily armed U.S. and South Korean troops, engineers with chainsaws, backed by helicopters, fighter jets, B-52 bombers flying nearby, even the USS Midway Aircraft Carrier Task Force moving offshore.
All just to cut down one tree?
It was a massive demonstration of force, basically daring the North Koreans to interfere. They didn't. And significantly afterwards, Kim Il-sung issued a statement expressing regret over the incident, the closest the regime has ever come to acknowledging fault for an aggressive act.
What did that show?
It showed that while North Korea was willing to engage in provocative violence and terrorism, they understood and respected overwhelming conventional military power. When faced with credible force, they backed down.
Moving into the 1980s, Kim Il-sung is getting the economy, which had some success in the 60s, really stagnating now. And the succession plan is kicking.
Yes, his son, Kim Jong, had been quietly groomed for power since the early 70s. He was handling things like propaganda, internal security, espionage. He was officially designated the heir in 1974.
But he didn't have his father's revolutionary background, right? No guerrilla fighting stories.
None at all. He was born in the Soviet Union during his father's exile, or on a sacred mountain, according to the official myth. So the propaganda machine had to work much, much harder to build his legitimacy.
And that led to some truly outlandish claims.
Oh, completely bonkers stuff. The official biography claimed a new star appeared in the heavens when he was born on Mount Pike 2. He supposedly hit 11 holes in one the very first time he played golf.
And then never played again,
Naturally. He also claimed to have invented the hamburger, calling it gijia bang, or double bread with meat. And perhaps the strangest, so perfect he didn't need to urinate or defecate.
Okay, inventing the hamburger and not needing the toilet. That's quite a resume. It speaks volumes about the level of manufactured reality.
It really does. It's about creating a figure totally beyond human limitation. He also had this very peculiar obsession with movies.
The film buff dictator. He wanted a communist Hollywood.
He did. He had a massive personal film library, thousands of tapes.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't happy with North Korean cinema. He thought it was wooden, uninspired.
So he decided to kidnap South Korea's top talent.
Literally.
Yeah.
In 1978, his agents kidnapped the famous South Korean actress Choi Eun-hee in Hong Kong. Then, when her ex-husband, the prominent director Shin Sang-ok, went looking for her, they kidnapped him too.
And forced them to make movies for him.
For years, they were held sometimes separately, sometimes together, pressured, cajoled, until they agreed. They made several films, including the infamous Pulgasari, basically a socialist Godzilla knockoff.
Until they managed to escape.
Yes, incredibly. During a film festival trip to Vienna in 1986, they sought asylum at the U.S. Embassy. Their story blew the lid off this bizarre aspect of the regime.
And this kidnapping wasn't unique, right, of the seed-bearing program?
No. The Shin and Choi case was the most famous, but it was part of a wider systematic program throughout the 70s and 80s of kidnapping foreign nationals, mostly Japanese citizens, but others too.
Why? What was the goal?
It seems multi-pronged. Some were kidnapped to teach Japanese language and culture to North Korean spies. But the darker aspect, the seed-bearing program, involved forcing some kidnapped foreigners to marry each other or marry other foreigners and have children.
To breed spies.
Essentially, yes. To create a pool of individuals who looked East Asian but had native fluency and cultural understanding of Japan or Europe, making them potential deep-cover agents, ethnically camouflaged spies. Incredibly.
This era, under Kim Jong-il's growing influence even before his father died, also saw a major escalation of state-sponsored terrorism.
A huge spike. The 1983 Rangoon bombing in Burma was a direct attempt to assassinate the visiting South Korean president Chun Doo-hwan. The bomb missed him but killed 21 other people, including 4 South Korean cabinet ministers.
And North Korean agents were caught.
Yes, one captured agent confessed, implicating Kim Jong-il directly. Then, arguably the most shocking act was the bombing of Korean Air Flight 858 in 1987.
Just before the Seoul Olympics.
Exactly. 2 North Korean agents, acting on Kim Jong-il's personal orders, planted a bomb on the plane. It detonated over the Andaman Sea, killing all 115 people aboard. The explicit goal was to frighten athletes and countries away from participating in the '88 Seoul Games.
One of the agents survived, Kim Hyun.
She did. She and her male partner took cyanide capsules when caught, but she survived. She later confessed, explaining she was trained from a young age, utterly indoctrinated. South Korea eventually pardoned her, viewing her as much a victim as a perpetrator, but the attack led the U.S. to formally label North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism.
So international pariah status cemented, and then comes the 1990s, and the ground shifts under the Soviet Union collapse.
This was an existential earthquake for North Korea. Their main economic patron, their ideological big brother, evaporated in 1990. At the same time, China was deepening its market reform, moving away from old-style communism.
Leaving Pyongyang totally isolated.
Completely adrift. Subsidized fuel imports stopped, crucial food aid from the Soviets vanished. Their entire economic model, based on that support, was suddenly unviable.
But Kim Jong-il didn't reform. He doubled down on Juche.
He doubled down hard. The official line became, see, our self-reliance was correct all along. The Soviets failed because they weren't pure enough. They relied on others. We will survive because of Juche. It was pure ideological defiance against overwhelming reality.
And that reality was famine, the arduous march.
The arduous march, starting around 1994, lasting into the late 90s. A catastrophic famine triggered by the loss of Soviet aid, combined with floods, droughts, and the inherent inefficiencies of the economy. They couldn't produce enough fertilizer domestically.
How bad?
Apocalyptic. The state rationing system, the PDS, completely collapsed in many areas. People were left to fend for themselves. We saw the rise of illegal private markets just for survival. Reports of widespread starvation, people eating grass and tree bark, gangs of starving homeless children called Kachibi roaming the cities.
The death toll estimates are huge, right? Way beyond the official numbers.
The official government figure acknowledged eventually was around 220,000 deaths. But international organizations, NGOs, defectors, their estimates range from 600,000 up to potentially 3.5 million people starving to death. We'll likely never know the true number.
And in the middle of this mass starvation, Kim Jong-il's priority was controlling information. Simwajo Purge.
Unbelievably, yes. He created a secret police unit, the Simwaho, in 1996, specifically to hunt down and punish anyone who dared to complain about the situation or even use the words famine or starvation, because that tarnished the regime's image.
They targeted officials, too.
Oh, yeah. Party members, administrators, anyone deemed critical of the government's handling of the crisis. Estimates suggest over 10,000 people were executed or disappeared in this internal purge during the famine. It was about preserving the myth of the infallible leadership, even as millions died.
This horrific experience cemented Kim Jong-il's own guiding ideology, didn't it? Songbun.
Yes, Songbun, or military first. Emerging from the crisis, the idea was that the Korean People's Army wasn't just the defender of the nation. It was the main engine of society, the model for everyone. Loyalty, discipline, obedience to the military command structure became paramount for all citizens. The military got priority for scarce resources, especially food.
So prioritize the guns over the starving population.
Essentially, yes. The logic was that only a strong military could guarantee the regime's survival against external threats, which were blamed, of course, for the country's hardship.
Despite this military focus, Kim Jong-il's grasp on economics seemed shaky at best. The 2009 currency revaluation.
A complete disaster. Utterly baffling and incompetent. The idea was supposedly to curb inflation and wipe out savings held in the growing black markets that emerged during the famine.
How did they mess it up so badly?
They issued new one notes, lopping 2 zeros off the currency. So 100 old one became 1 new one. But crucially, they severely limited the amount of old money people could exchange, basically destroying most private savings overnight. And bizarrely, they kept wages numerically the same in the new currency.
Wait. So if you earned 3,000 old won a month, you now earned 3,000 new won, which was effectively 300,000 old won, a 100-fold pay rise.
Effectively, yes. It triggered instantaneous, catastrophic hyperinflation. The value of the new currency plummeted. Food disappeared from state shops. People panicked. There were reports of unprecedented public anger, even small-scale protests.
Diplomats were quoted saying the government just didn't understand basic economics.
They clearly didn't. It was probably the closest the regime came to collapsing from purely internal economic mismanagement and popular unrest. They eventually had to backtrack, and the official responsible was reportedly executed as a scapegoat.
And even with all this internal chaos, the external provocations continued. 2010 was a bad year.
A very tense year. In March, the South Korean naval corvette, the ROKS Cheonan, was sunk. Investigators concluded by North Korean torpedo. 46 sailors died.
Pyongyang denied it, of course.
Vehement. Then, in November 2010, during a South Korean military exercise near the disputed maritime border, North Korea shelled the South Korean island of Yeonpyeong.
With artillery.
Almost 200 shells. Killed 2 South Korean Marines and 2 civilians. Destroyed dozens of houses. It was a major escalation, bringing the peninsula arguably to the brink of serious conflict again. This was the volatile situation Kim Jong-un inherited just a year later.
So Kim Jong-il dies suddenly in December 2011, and power passes to his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, who wasn't really expected heir, was he?
Not at all. The eldest son, Kim Jong-nam, was considered the favored for years, until he had that rather embarrassing incident in 2001 trying to sneak into Japan on a fake passport to visit Tokyo
Disneyland. That cost him the throne.
It certainly seems to have been the final straw. It deeply embarrassed his father. So attention shifted to the younger sons and eventually settled on Kim Jong-un, the third son.
And his background was very different. educated in Switzerland.
Yes, for several years in the 1990s, apparently under a pseudonym at an international school near Bern. People who knew him then described him as quiet, liked basketball a lot, skiing, video games. Seemed relatively normal, maybe a bit awkward.
That exposure to the West, however limited, seems to have shaped his approach, at least initially. He made a pivot away from his father's song.
He did signal a shift. While the military remains incredibly important, he seemed to move away from the absolute military-first doctrine and put more emphasis back on the Workers' Party, empowering party officials and economic managers, trying to balance things out a bit more, perhaps recognizing the economy needed fixing.
But this shift wasn't gentle. It involved getting rid of potential rivals, most notably his own uncle, Songbun.
That was a brutal demonstration of power in 2013. Jang was hugely influential, a veteran figure married to Kim Il-sung's daughter. He was seen as a potential regent figure, maybe even a rival.
And the reason for the purge was reportedly control over fisheries.
That was one of the reported triggers, yeah. Disputes over control of lucrative state businesses like fisheries and coal export. Whatever the exact reason, Kim Jong-un moved decisive. Jang was publicly denounced as a traitor, stripped of all posts, and executed.
By firing squad, reports said, but his deputy, the flamethrower story, is that credible?
It's been widely reported, though obviously hard to verify definitively from inside North Korea. Oh Sang-han, a deputy minister under Jang, was allegedly executed using a flamethrower.
Why use such a gruesome, almost theatrical method?
Pure terror. It sends an unmistakable message to the entire elite. Loyalty must be absolute, deviation will not be tolerated, and the punishment can be exceptionally cruel. It cemented Un's reputation for ruthlessness, perhaps even exceeding his father. No one was safe.
At the same time, though, he tried to project a softer, more modern image, didn't he? Appearing in public with his wife.
Yes. That was a significant break from tradition. His father rarely appeared with his partner. Kim Jong-un bringing his wife, Ri Sol-ju, a former singer, to public events, concerts, inspections. It presented a younger, more relatable image.
And the pop concerts with Disney characters, that seemed designed for external.
Absolutely. Mickey Mouse on stage in Pyongyang. Plus, his own physical appearance, deliberately modeled somewhat on his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, the revered founder. It was all carefully managed image-making, likely influenced by his time in Europe.
And then there was the Dennis Rodman connection, his basketball obsession leading diplomacy.
Well, diplomacy might be generous. Rodman, the eccentric former NBA star, visited Pyongyang multiple times. They watched games together. Rodman called Kim his friend for life. It generated huge media attention, but achieved essentially zero diplomatic substance. Just a bizarre sideshow.
So a softer image, basketball, but underneath, the control is still absolute, maybe even tighter on foreign culture.
Oh, absolutely tighter in many ways. This superficial openness is very deceptive. Take the internet. Only a tiny elite, maybe a few thousand people connected to the leadership or specific technical job, have access to the actual World Wide Web.
The rest use that internal network.
Right. A walled garden, internet, no connection to the outside world. And the crackdown on foreign media, especially from South Korea, is incredibly harsh under Kim Jong.
K-pop is a vicious cancer.
That's the official state rhetoric, yeah. Corrupting socialist mind. And the punishments are extreme. There have been credible reports of public executions, 7 people at one time, allegedly just for watching or distributing South Korean videos or music.
Even things like fashion are controlled. The haircut.
Yes, that story emerged around 2017. Reports claim there were only 15 state-approved hairstyles for women, and maybe a similar number for men. It reinforces the idea that individuality is suspect, conformity is mandatory, right down to your hair.
So what's daily life like for the average person beyond the elite in Pyongyang?
Well, defectors consistently say most North Koreans are just trying to get by.
Yeah.
Focused on family, finding food, dealing with work quotas, maybe navigating the local black markets that are still essential for survival. They worry about relationships, kids' education, normal human concern.
But under much harsher conditions, the electricity statistic is shocking.
Yeah, a 2019 estimate suggested only about 26% of households had regular access to electricity. Huge parts of the country are dark at night. Yet, paradoxically, in Pyongyang, you have this growing elite, the danju or money masters, who've benefited from market activity, flaunting relative wealth, eating at expensive restaurants, a massive internal disparity.
Under UN, the Byungjin policy parallel economic and military development came back, but with a laser focus on one thing.
Nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Under Anon seems to genuinely believe that a credible nuclear deterrent is the only ultimate guarantee of his regime's survival and the key to future economic leverage. Everything is geared.
So the best minds go into the weapons program.
The brightest science and engineering graduates are funneled into nuclear and missile development, and he's prioritized delivery systems, ballistic missiles.
The Hwasong 15 test in 2017 really grabbed attention.
It was a game changer. That test demonstrated, theoretically at least, that North Korea possessed an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. capable of reaching the entire continental United States. That fundamentally changed the strategic calculation for Washington.
But nukes aren't their only weapon of disruption, are they? Cyberware.
Right. Kim Jong-il reportedly called cyber capabilities the equivalent of an atomic bomb for a poor country. And under Kim Jong-un, they've built a formidable cyber warfare, often called Bureau 121 or the Lazarus Group. Thousands of highly skilled hackers.
And they're not just hacking for secrets, they're hacking for cash.
Massively. It's state-sponsored criminal enterprise on a global scale. A UN report in 2019 estimated they'd stolen maybe $2 billion through cybercrime hacking banks, cryptocurrency exchanges, running ransomware schemes, online scams.
This funds the regime, circumvents sanctions.
Exactly. It's a vital source of hard currency to fund the nuclear program, missile tests, luxury goods for the elite, everything sanctions are supposed to stop.
We've seen some high-profile attacks. The Sony hack.
That was 2014. In retaliation for the movie The Interview, which depicted Kim Jong-un's assassination, they crippled Sony Pictures Network, released embarrassing email. Then in 2017, the WannaCry ransomware attack.
That hit hundreds of thousands of computers worldwide, including the UK's health service.
Yes, the NHS was severely disrupted. It caused billions in damages globally. While attribution is complex, multiple security agencies pointed the finger firmly at North Korean state actors. Their reach and capability are significant.
This tightly controlled, hostile state, it creates real human tragedies, too. The Otto Warmbier case still resonates
deeply. The American college student arrested in 2015, supposedly for trying to steal a propaganda poster from his hotel. A seemingly minor act, maybe a drunken prank.
Sentenced to 15 years hard labor.
And then released 17 months later, inexplicably, in a vegetative state, a coma. He died days after returning to the U.S. Medical evidence suggested severe brain damage due to lack of oxygen, possibly from torture or a botched procedure after an injury. It was a horrifying illustration of the regime's brutality and opacity.
Has escaping gotten harder under Kim Jong-un?
Much harder.
Yeah.
Defection numbers plummeted. He significantly tightened border security, especially along the Chinese border, which is the main escape route. More fences, more guards, harsher punishments for those caught or for families left behind. The success rate, which was maybe 50-50 under his father, dropped to less than 10%.
And Un's ruthlessness extends to family, too. The assassination of his half-brother, Kim Jong-nam.
In 2017, at Kuala Lumpur Airport in Malaysia, Kim Jong-nam had been living in exile, occasionally making critical comments about the regime. He was seen as a potential alternative leader, perhaps backed by China.
Killed with VX nerve agent in public.
Yes, 2 women smeared the chemical weapon on his face. It was incredibly brazen. And the chilling part is how the assassins were recruited.
They thought it was a prank show.
Apparently so. North Korean agents allegedly tricked these 2 young women, one Indonesian, one Vietnamese, into thinking they were participating in a hidden camera prank for YouTube, practicing smearing lotion on strangers' faces. Then they gave them the VX agent for the real target. It's diabolical.
We also saw that strange period of diplomacy with Donald Trump, the summits in Singapore, Vietnam, the meeting at the DMZ.
A truly bizarre spectacle. High stakes, personal diplomacy between 2 leaders who seemed to enjoy the spotlight. There were hopes of a breakthrough, maybe trading sanctions relief for denuclearization steps.
But it ultimately went nowhere.
It collapsed fundamentally because Kim Jong-un was unwilling to give up his nuclear arsenal, his ultimate guarantee, and Trump wasn't willing to lift major sanctions without complete denuclearization. The gap was just too wide.
And finally, COVID-19 hit. How did North Korea react?
Predictably, by sealing itself off even more tightly than ever before. They shut their borders almost completely in early 2020. In a way, their extreme isolation became a perceived strength in a pandemic, but it also devastated their already meager trade with China and led to reports of even harsher internal control, including executions for violating quarantine rules. #outro. So you take this whole sweep of history, the war trauma, the ideology, the purges, the famines, the nuclear ambition, and you look at the Korean Peninsula today. The contrast is just staggering.
The economic gap is the starkest measure, right?
Yeah, South Korea's per capita income is roughly 15 times higher than North Korea. That's believed to be the largest income gap between 2 countries sharing a land border anywhere in the world.
And just for context, the gap between East and West Germany, the one that helped bring down the Berlin Wall, was only about 3-1.
Exactly. It highlights the catastrophic failure of the North Korean economic model compared to the South's success.
Kim Jong-nam, the assassinated brother, apparently made a chillingly accurate comment about the regime's dilemma.
He did. He basically said the regime was trapped. Path 1. Continue exactly as they are, totally resistant to change. The result, inevitable slow decline and bankruptcy as the rest of the world progresses.
And path 2.
Path 2, attempt meaningful reform, open up the economy, allow more information in. The risk there, losing control, shattering the ideology, and triggering systemic collapse, maybe violently.
So Kim Jong-un is trying to find some impossible middle way.
It seems like it. Using the nuclear weapons and cyber capabilities as a shield, a guarantee against external pressure, while maybe allowing just enough controlled market activity internally to prevent total collapse, but without ever loosening political control, relying on old allies like Russia for support now, too.
It leaves us not or are the pressure. That's